Hello, hello. Check, check. All right, new computer. Here we go. So in today's video, we are going to be looking at the Qing Dynasty, how it was able to overthrow the Ming Dynasty and establish itself as the last major Chinese dynasty ruling over the Chinese heartland, and was able to expand into Western regions and bring in new groups into the Chinese Empire. This picture here is a image from a battle in the 1670s, 1680s, in which you can see the use of both traditional horseback archers and modern artillery. So just like with the other land-based empires that we're looking at, the Qing Dynasty integrate traditionally successful forms of warfare with new technologies that make it possible for them to expand their territory. So some of the key dates that we're going to be looking at, we're going to be starting with the Ming Dynasty and just mentioning them a little bit because they represent kind of a different direction that China could have gone. And so in 1368, the Mongol dynasty, known as the Yuan dynasty, collapses, and the Ming dynasty is able to overthrow them and take their place. From 1368 to 1430, the Ming dynasty pursue an interesting policy of exploration and trade or tribute collection from various Southeast Asian and Indian Ocean states. So they travel all the way to the east coast of Africa, establishing contacts and spreading sort of Chinese propaganda during this time period. However, in 1430, the Ming emperor decides that this is a waste of resources and that China does not need to explore or expand into the Indian Ocean, and that rather everybody should just come to China if they want to trade with China, which is, of course, a hugely fateful decision because by the 1490s, the Portuguese are going to be showing up in the Indian Ocean and are going to be able to establish themselves as a dominant trading power there. So that's a key turning point in world history. If the Chinese had already established themselves in the Indian Ocean, it's possible that the Portuguese would not have had such an easy time establishing themselves. Anyway, skip forward 200 years to 1640, and you'll see that the Ming Dynasty collapses. So the Ming Dynasty is not a minor dynasty. They are very important. We're just going to be skipping them to look at the Qing Dynasty instead. So the Ming Dynasty suffers from a variety of economic problems and becomes increasingly unpopular, and eventually a nomadic group from the north, surprise, surprise, is able to invade and overthrow them. These guys are known as the Manchu. When they invade, they come from a northeast region of China known as Manchuria. But after they establish themselves as a new dynasty, they adopt the name the Qing. Much like the Mongols adopted the name Yuan when they came in and conquered China, the Manchu adopt the name Qing when they come in and invade. After taking over and securing the core Chinese territories, the Manchu then began expanding west, conquering Mongolia, Central Asia, and Tibet, bringing their dynasty to the largest size of any of the Chinese dynasties that far. From this point on, though, there's kind of a steady decline in Qing fortunes. Starting around 1800, they have a series of conflicts with the British known as the Opium Wars, in which the British forced them to cede certain trading rights. Most notably, they forced the Qing to legalize opium, which is not particularly helpful for the Chinese economy or for Chinese public health. And around 1900, after suffering at the hands of European colonizers for about a century, the Qing Dynasty finally collapses, and China then goes through a 50-year period of invasion and civil war before the Chinese Communist Party finally emerges victorious. So that's a big overview of the fortunes of the Ming and the Qing Dynasty. Let's move on from there to look at a map. So as you can see here, the Ming Dynasty launched several major expeditions from the east coast of China, and these expeditions were interested in exploring the possibilities for trade and tribute collection throughout the Indian Ocean, which, as we've already mentioned many times in this course, was kind of the economic engine of the medieval world. So for a very long time, China had already been participating in the Indian Ocean trade, but they had never really controlled the trade. Chinese goods like silk and porcelain were highly sought after and were exported from China down to Southeast Asia through the Straits of Malacca and into the Indian Ocean, and as far away as Africa and eventually even Europe. But during the Ming Dynasty, they sought to figure out what was going on and potentially increase their control over this huge trade network. And so they dispatched a series of fleets, sometimes known as the treasure fleet, because they would just give away Chinese treasure as a way of showing Chinese cultural and economic dominance. It was led by this guy, Zheng He, who was actually a Muslim, showing that the Ming Dynasty was quite ethnically and religiously diverse as well. He was from northwest China. And he led a number of expeditions and came back with all sorts of cool stuff, including a giraffe, as you can see here. But in spite of the interesting discoveries made by these expeditions, they are eventually cut off in the 1430s. And with that, we are going to go ahead and just skip right back to land-based China. So just take a moment to think about what might have been if China had managed to expand its control into the Indian Ocean. And then let's go back to the mainland Chinese Empire, because that is really where the Chinese are going to end up focusing. Instead of expanding into the Indian Ocean, they are simply going to expand inward to conquer surrounding territories. So let's do a quick tour. So first of all, the Manchu, the people who actually found the Qing Dynasty, come from this region here. This northeastern chunk of China is Manchuria. It's cold, it's mountainous, and these guys are a nomadic group, a fiercely militaristic group, and they're able to exploit weaknesses in the Ming Dynasty and expand down into the Chinese heartland. The Chinese heartland encompassing the drainages of the Yellow and the Yangtze River, one of the most densely populated regions of the world, comes under the control of the Qing Dynasty. And then from there, the Qing Dynasty expand out into other less populous regions that are inhabited not primarily by the Han Chinese ethnic group, but by other ethnic groups. They expand northwest into Mongolia, populated by Mongols. They expand northwest into the Xinjiang province. This province has been in the news more recently because China has been setting up quote-unquote re-education camps in which they've been putting ethnic and religious minorities in to be quote-unquote re-educated, aka potentially punished for their differences or brainwashed or just removed from society. And then last of all, down in the southwest, you've got Tibet, which is populated by Tibetans. And there are a bunch of other states near China that pay tribute to China, even though they are never conquered. That is, they are more or less forced into a submissive trading relationship with China. And that includes Nepal, down here, Korea, up here, Vietnam, down to the south, Siam, and Burma. So China kind of effectively dominates this whole chunk of East Asia and collects taxes and tribute from all of these different places. So like the other land-based empires that we're looking at here, the Qing rely on a powerful and effective military in order to expand. So the Qing, like the Turks and like the Russians, with the with the nomadic Cossack warriors serving the Tsar, the Qing rely quite strongly on nomadic style cavalry. In fact, one of the big benefits that they get from conquering Mongolia and Xinjiang is they are able to control a place where there are still a lot of people who live the sort of traditional nomadic lifestyle and who are still very effective sort of Mongol-style warriors, very resilient, self-sufficient, mobile, and incredibly good horsemen. So here we see a picture of a Qing soldier riding on his little pony through a dusty plain with a cute little musket ready for use from horseback. In this one little image here, we see the adoption of new firearm technology and the incorporation of it into traditional sort of nomadic style warfare. And with this powerful military, they're able to expand and then control new territories that no other Chinese dynasty had ever really controlled, except I guess for Central Asia, which was controlled by the Tang and for a while by the Han. But anyway, so the Manchu are able to control the Chinese heartland, they're able to control Central Asia, and they're able to control Tibet, making the Qing Dynasty a enormous territory that holds together for about 200 years. So, by conquering all of this new territory, the Manchu are bring in a whole bunch of new ethnic groups under the control of the Chinese emperor. So the Manchu, as I already mentioned, come from up here in the north. And then the sort of majority population, the Han Chinese, that is the people from the Chinese heartland, mostly agriculturalists, live here in this eastern half of the empire. And these guys are primarily Buddhist, Confucian, or Taoist. They are largely farmers or urban city dwellers. And they tend to look down on other ethnic groups because the Chinese have a long tradition of viewing themselves as the sort of dominant, superior civilization, the whole concept of the Middle Kingdom. To the north, you've got Mongols living up here. Up to the very northwest, you've got ethnic groups known as Uyghurs. These guys are also nomadic, and they tend to be Muslim. And then to the southwest, you've got Tibetans, who practice a different type of Buddhism than the type of Buddhism that is popular among the Han Chinese. The Han Chinese tend to practice a type of Buddhism known as Mahayana Buddhism, whereas the Tibetans tend to practice a form of Buddhism known as Vajrayana Buddhism. And so there is still a religious divide there, even though both sides are Buddhist. So they've got a patchwork of different ethnicities, just like every other one of these big land-based empires. And therefore, the Qing are going to have to make a variety of attempts to legitimize themselves in the eyes of all these different groups. So one way that the Qing do this is through a program of official portraiture. That is, using paintings of the Qing rulers to establish the Qing rulers as sort of classic Chinese Han gentlemen. So even though these guys are, Manchu from the cold, lightly populated Northeast. They are nomads. They want to portray themselves as classic Confucian gentlemen. That way, all the other Confucian gentlemen that they need in order to run the country will listen to them and work with them. So here we have an image of one of the Qing emperors, and you can see that he's portraying himself in like fancy silk robes with a book open in front of him. And the idea here is to show that they, like Confucius would have recommended, are devoted to study, the study of literature and literacy as a key goal for any classy Chinese gentleman. Also, these portraits are used to respect the dead emperors and are used to venerate them as a way of showing filial piety, that is, respect for one's ancestors. And so this is also a key Confucian value. And so in these two ways, the portraits are used in order to kind of win some Confucian street cred for the emperors. And these portraits would be produced all over the place and sent everywhere, and there'd be pictures of the emperors hanging up all over the place. And this means that the Han elite would see pictures of their emperor, and the idea was that it would help to convince them that the new dynasty did indeed have the mandate of heaven. Another thing that would happen that the emperors would do is they adopted and elaborated upon key traditional Confucian rituals. So there would be these big ceremonial sites, and the emperor would bring together lots of important people to watch the rituals, and then the emperor would preside over these rituals and lead them. One of the most famous ones was the Temple of Agriculture, which was housed in the northern capital of Beijing. And what would happen is this would happen in early spring, and the emperor himself would plow the first furrow and plant the first seeds of the season. And after doing that, everybody else would then be allowed to begin planting. But until the emperor plowed his furrow and planted his first seed, no one else would be allowed to plant. And so by taking over and then kind of elaborating upon key Confucian rituals, the emperors are able to show their commitment to Confucianism and win over the Confucian elites who they need to actually administer this vast empire. So in both cases, they're basically just trying to prove that they are on the same side and that they share the same values of the traditional Confucian elite that have ruled China ever since, I don't know, like the Tang or the Song dynasty, if not even further back. Now, in looking at different ways that the Qing attempted to manage the multicultural population, we have a couple different strategies. So as a way of attempting to foster coexistence, the Manchu were highly tolerant of different religions. They really did not care if somebody was Han or if somebody was Taoist or Confucian or Muslim, as long as they paid their taxes and followed local regulations. And the Qing were quite happy to promote local rulers to positions of prominence. Now, the Qing actually worked against syncretism. While they did rule over a... sorry for the pause. Sorry for the pause there, guys. I got a phone call in the middle of the recording. So anyway, I think I was talking about how the Qing actually fought against syncretism. They did not want the different cultural groups to mix because they thought that the different cultural groups were good for different things. The Han were excellent farmers and were very easy to tax and produced tons of taxable and tradable commodities like rice and silk and tea and good stuff like that. But the other ethnic groups, especially the Mongols and the Xinjiang Uyghurs, were excellent warriors. They lived a more nomadic lifestyle. They were slightly harder to control, but they made up the bulk of the Qing military. And so the Qing were worried that if the two groups mixed, that they would lose some of the benefits of having a farming population and a nomadic population. So they kept them separate and mostly drew their taxes from the Han and drew their soldiers from the Mongols and the Uyghurs. Another thing that the Qing did, and I'm not really sure why they were so committed to this policy, but they required every single Qing male, regardless of their origin, to wear the same haircut. And this haircut here was known as the Q, and you were required to shave all your entire head except for the back part, and then braid that into a long braid that you basically never cut. And the Qing enforced this policy very strictly, and you basically had no choice. If you were caught without this hairstyle, you would face serious punishment. And so, as I said, I'm not totally sure why the Qing were so committed to this, but it did result in sort of a national style. Also, one last thing is the Manchu elite also sought to preserve their own ethnic identity as well, and so they banned any marriages between the Manchu and the local Han as well. And last of all, the Qing Dynasty intentionally restricted trade with Europe and limited European trade to just a couple ports in the south, in the region of Canton. And this was to make sure that they were able to maintain control over what was coming in and going out of the country. Of course, the Opium Wars are going to change all of that, but we'll talk about that in a later unit. Now, there were a number of rebellions against the Manchus. A lot of the ethnic Han majority population viewed the Manchus as barbarians in spite of the Manchus' efforts to portray themselves as Confucian gentlemen. And you see a number of massive rebellions and uprisings. One of the most notable is the White Lotus Uprising, which happens in the early 1800s, and then a number of bigger uprisings, including the Taiping and the Boxer uprisings that happened later on, which we'll talk about in greater detail. But so I think it's safe to say that the Manchu did take steps towards coexistence, but they actively worked against cultural syncretism, and possibly as a result of this, struggled to maintain peace and kind of harmony among the different ethnic groups within their empire. So, kind of building on that, let's look at some other key weaknesses of the Manchu dynasty. So, as I already mentioned, they do not fully integrate the different ethnic groups into a single functional whole, and there's increasingly violent rebellions over time. Second, the Qing dynasty is going to be rocked by ecological and economic problems that get worse over time. First, partially as a result of Qing policy, but partially also because of increasing maritime trade as a result of European oceanic domination. Overland trade through the Qing territories of Mongolia and Xinjiang in the northwest is going to decline, and these regions are going to become increasingly economically backward after the Qing conquer them. The Qing are also going to oversee a population boom, which sounds like it would be a good thing, but in fact it results in serious ecological problems. Partially as a result of the importation of new foodstuffs, especially the sweet potato from the Americas. You see a rapid rise in the Chinese population, in the Han population especially, and these groups are going to move into the more mountainous regions to the west and begin clearing these mountains and farming these mountains. Now the problem with this is that by clearing the mountains' abilities to absorb rainwater is going to decrease, and you're going to get more runoff, which is going to result occasionally in massive floods. These floods are going to then hit downriver in the Chinese heartland and destroy rice fields and dams and irrigation networks. That is then going to result in famines. So what seems like it would be a good thing, a population boom, in fact turns out to be kind of set off a chain reaction that results in death and chaos in the more populous Chinese lowland regions. And last of all, the Qing Dynasty was not particularly open to new ideas. Most notably, they regarded Europeans as barbarians and were distinctly uninterested in European technology. The Europeans, if they wanted to trade at all, were required to bow before Chinese representatives in a ritual known as kowtowing. You can see a depiction here of a tiny European kowtowing before a Qing official. But eventually, this policy of closure to European ideas is not going to be possible because the Europeans and then even the Japanese are going to defeat them in war and force them to interact, but now on European or Japanese terms. So anyway, that's a quick overview of some stuff that the Qing do. So anyway, I would recommend that you, after you finish taking notes on this video, that you go and update your overview of the Qing, and then tune in soon for the Mughal Empire, which is the last of the big land-based empires that we're going to be looking at in this unit. Thanks. Bye.